How do we see God in our current context? How do we see God in our world? If you listen to some people, they say that they can't see God. That perhaps because they can't see God, that God probably doesn't exist. And we know that there are more Australians now than ever who are saying they don't believe in God. They don't identify with any religion. They don't necessarily identify with a community of followers of God. So how do we see God? Our scriptures today are asking us in our gospel to stay alert and prepared for the coming. We don't know when the coming is going to happen, but we need to be ready. As servants, we shouldn't give up. Just because we think, oh, well, we can't see the master coming, as the gospel talks about, doesn't mean that we shouldn't be committed to continuing to do the work of the master. Here we have this beautiful parable. Jesus says, well, the servants should be about their work. The master or the landowner has gone off to a wedding and they're waiting for his return. They don't know when he's going to come back, but they need to be doing their work. They need to be faithful, committed in what they do. And this is for us as well. We're called to be committed to what we've been asked to do, to live the way of love every single day. Not because God's seeing us right this very moment, but because that's part of our commitment. And we know that we're doing the work of God. And we have this beautiful analogy that Jesus gives that when the master returns, as opposed to the servants serving the master, we have the master who sits down, we're told, and he will then be happy with the servants. He will then, we're told, he will put on an apron, sit the servants down at table and start to wait on them, to turn perhaps the tables around. The servants becomes the ones who are served. And that's what will happen with us too, if we're committed and faithful always. But the challenge, I think, is how do we see God in the midst of our world? This week we've had our second week of our preparation for First Holy Communion. Last week we began and we were thinking about the importance of the gathering, the importance of the welcome and the introductory rites. The second week of our program thinks about the importance of the liturgy of the Word, how we experience God not just through the community gathered, but through the reading and the proclamation of the Word. And that includes our first reading, the Psalm, the second reading, the Gospel, our homily, the Creed, and the prayers of the faithful. That is the liturgy of the Word. And we're called to see and to hear something of God through the liturgy of the Word. Every time we come, we shouldn't just sort of be passive. We should be actively listening. How is God speaking to each of us through the proclamation of the Word of God? Because the Word of God is alive and active, we're told in St. Paul's writings. And that God speaks to us through the Scriptures. But we need to be actively listening. There's so much noise that goes on in our world today that we can easily sort of become distracted. So what are we listening for? St. Ignatius of Loyola came up with a great method called the daily examen. You might have heard of this before, where during a day he would recommend people to stop and pause for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or so to see where God is present in their life. God is present in so many ways. And a significant part of the Scriptures, especially the Old Testament, a lot of the New Testament, are communities grappling with how are they experiencing God? Where do they see God in their daily life? And perhaps there are other stories about where they don't see God in their life, whether perhaps they see evil or the devil in their life. And people write about these stories. The first reading today we have from the Book of Wisdom. Jewish people, thousands of years before the time of Christ, trying to grapple with why bad things are happening to people who are committed to faith. And then the idea up until that stage in the Old Testament was that if you were good with God, well, good things will happen to you. Well, we know that that's not necessarily the case in our own lives. And they try to grapple with this. They say, well, Should we just give up and be like everybody else who doesn't really care about God because it makes no difference in our lives? And then they said, no, God has a path for us as saints. God has a kingdom, not just in this world, but a kingdom in eternity that's been prepared for us. And so they said, we're going to stay faithful even if things are a mess. They were trying to make sense of God in their own life. So back to the Daily Examine. St. Ignatius encourages us to pause and to think about where we're experiencing God. And we can do this, and we should do this in our daily lives as well, because our lives are a bit like a Bible. God is present in our lives. Where are we finding the goodness in our life? Where are we finding those good moments? And perhaps where are we finding those challenging moments, those dark moments as well? And we shouldn't just bottle this up inside us. It's a great thing for couples to do, to talk to each other, perhaps when you have a dinner together. Where are we finding God in our life? And then where are we finding those bad moments as well? And to share those things. We don't just share our meals or share the daily experience of life. We share those moments of goodness and those moments of struggle. And these are great conversations also to have with your kids, your grandkids, even maybe your great-grandchildren around a dinner table. Where is God present in your life? Where have you found goodness? And where have you found perhaps tragedy in your daily life? Maybe try this in the next couple of days. When you have dinner tonight, maybe think, where have I found goodness today? And where have perhaps I've not found something of God? This is the living Word of God. We hear the Scriptures, but our lives are a bit like a Bible as well. In a moment, I'm going to invite some of our First Holy Communion candidates. There are a couple of them around the church this morning, I think. And this week they've been asked to think about the Scriptures and about the stories from the Scriptures. Because the Scriptures reveal something of God to us. And they help us to think about that relationship with God. So in a moment, I'm going to sit down, we'll have our first collection, and then I'll invite our First Communion candidates to join us up the front.